In the dim, oppressive haze of a forgotten estate perched on the edge of a crumbling cliff, where the sea below whispered secrets to the jagged rocks, lived the twins Elias and Alara. Their birth had been a hushed affair, shrouded in the kind of silence that breeds unease, for even as infants, their forms carried an inexplicable wrongness, a subtle asymmetry in their features, eyes that gleamed with an otherworldly hue under the flicker of candlelight. The house itself seemed complicit, its walls etched with veins of mold that pulsed faintly in the night, as if the structure breathed in rhythm with their shared pulse. No one in the village below dared speak of the family's lineage, a tangled web of whispers about blood too pure, too intertwined, defying the natural order. Elias, with his elongated fingers that curled like seeking tendrils, and Alara, her skin a translucent map of shadowed vessels, moved through the shadowed corridors as one entity, their thoughts entwining in ways that blurred the boundary between sibling and soulmate. As the years warped their bodies further, bending bones and stretching flesh in grotesque defiance of anatomy, a forbidden desire took root, promising a union that would unravel the fragile veil between love and abomination. The wind howled through cracked windows, carrying echoes of warnings unheeded, as the twins stepped toward a threshold from which there could be no return, their fates sealed in the insidious embrace of heredity's cruel design. In the shadowed cradle of a remote village nestled deep within mist-veiled valleys, where the mountains loomed like ancient sentinels guarding unspoken sins, Elias and Alara came into the world on a night when the storm raged with unnatural fury. The midwife, an old woman whose hands trembled not from age but from the sight before her, delivered them in silence, her lips pressed tight against the urge to cry out. From the very first breath, the twins bore marks that set them apart, an eerie symmetry broken by subtle distortions. Elias's tiny fingers slightly longer than they should be, curling inward as if grasping at secrets yet unborn, Alara's eyes a shade too pale, reflecting light in a way that made them seem luminous even in the dim glow of the birthing room's single lantern. Their mother, pale and exhausted, gazed upon them with a mixture of fierce love and quiet dread, for she knew the whispers that clung to her family's name like cobwebs in forgotten corners. The estate where they were born stood isolated on the outskirts, its Gothic spires piercing the perpetual fog that rolled in from the nearby moors, a place where the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Villagers spoke in hushed tones of the bloodline that had dwelled there for generations, a lineage steeped in seclusion, where marriages were arranged not with outsiders but within the tight coil of kin, preserving what some called purity and others deemed a curse. As the twins lay side by side in their cradle, their cries harmonized in a haunting duet, already bound by something deeper than mere siblinghood. The anomalies were faint at first, a slight webbing between Alara's toes, an unnatural flexibility in Elias's spine that allowed him to twist in ways no infant should. Doctors from distant towns were summoned in secret, only to depart with furrowed brows and evasive diagnoses, muttering of rare genetic quirks passed down through recessive traits amplified by proximity. Yet no one dared name the true source, the generations of unions that had folded the family tree inward upon itself, concentrating flaws like poison in a sealed vial. The house itself seemed to welcome their arrival, its creaking timbers echoing their wails, the portraits of ancestors lining the halls staring down with eyes that mirrored the twins' emerging strangeness. In those early days, as nurses came and went under strict orders of discretion, the seeds of isolation were sown. The twins were kept hidden from prying village eyes, their existence a guarded mystery, while the fog outside thickened, as if the world itself conspired to veil the burgeoning horror of what inherited shadows might yet unfold in their intertwined lives. The deformities, though subtle now, pulsed beneath the surface like a latent storm, waiting for the years to tease them into full, grotesque bloom. As the twins grew from infancy into childhood, the vast estate became their entire world, a labyrinth of shadowed halls and overgrown gardens where sunlight struggled to penetrate the perpetual veil of fog. Elias and Alara moved through these spaces as extensions of one another, their steps synchronized, their laughter echoing in perfect unison that unsettled the few servants who remained. From the earliest moments they could toddle, they sought only each other's company, turning away from the nursemaids who tried to separate them for lessons or play, their small hands clutching with a desperation that bordered on ferocity. In the nursery's dim light, they would huddle together beneath heavy velvet drapes, whispering in a language that seemed to predate words, soft murmurs and clicks that conveyed volumes only they understood. They spoke of dreams that visited them both simultaneously, visions of vast, twisted landscapes where figures with elongated limbs danced in circles beneath a blood-red moon, their bodies contorted in ways that mirrored the subtle oddities already emerging in their own forms. These shared nocturnal wanderings bound them tighter than any ordinary sibling bond, forging a connection that felt predestined, inevitable, as if their souls had been split from a single malformed source. The village children, on the rare occasions when the twins were permitted brief glimpses of the outside world, recoiled instinctively. Elias and Alara would stand at the iron gates, pale faces pressed against the bars, watching the others play with a hunger that was not for friendship but for understanding. Yet the moment any child approached, the twins would retreat inward, linking arms and retreating to their hidden corners, rejecting the normalcy that felt alien and threatening. Toys lay untouched unless they could be shared in their private rituals, dolls whose limbs they bent at unnatural angles, mirrors they covered with cloth lest they see the growing differences in their reflections. Their isolation deepened with each passing year, the estate's walls closing in like a living tomb. Servants whispered of how the twins finished each other's sentences before they were spoken, how they winced in unison at pains felt by only one, how their eyes held a knowing gleam that suggested secrets too profound for childhood. In the quiet hours when the house slept, they would creep into forbidden rooms, tracing the faded portraits of ancestors whose features bore the same unsettling asymmetries, murmuring about the day when their bond would transcend all boundaries, when the dreams of twisted unions would become reality. The air around them grew thick with unspoken promises, the kind that fester in darkness, drawing them ever closer into a world that existed solely between the two of them, where deformity was not flaw but sacred mark of their unbreakable unity. As the twins crossed the threshold into adolescence, the subtle anomalies that had once been dismissed as childhood quirks began to assert themselves with a relentless, almost malevolent insistence. Elias awoke one morning to find his arms had lengthened overnight, his fingers now tapering into elegant yet unnatural spindles that brushed the floor when he stood, forcing him to stoop like a creature unaccustomed to its own skin. Ilara's transformation was no less unnerving, her once rosy complexion faded to a ghostly pallor, the skin across her cheeks and throat turning translucent enough to reveal the faint blue tracery of veins beneath, pulsing in slow, deliberate rhythms that seemed to echo the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. The changes did not arrive gently. Bones creaked and shifted in the night, joints popping with sounds that reverberated through the empty corridors like distant thunder. Elias's spine curved slightly forward, granting him a predatory grace even as it pained him, while Ilara's ribs expanded outward in irregular patterns, pressing against her dresses until the fabric strained and tore at the seams. They hid these developments at first, wrapping themselves in oversized garments scavenged from ancestral wardrobes, but concealment grew impossible as the deformities accelerated, twisting their bodies into forms that defied human proportion. In the village below, whispers that had long simmered now boiled over into open fear. Children who once peered curiously through the estate's rusted gates now fled at the sight of the twins taking their rare, supervised walks along the perimeter. Farmers crossed themselves when the siblings passed, muttering prayers against the evil that surely dwelt within those walls. The local priest refused to bless the house any longer, claiming the air itself carried a taint that clung to his cassock for days afterward. Deliveries arrived at the gates but were left unattended, tradesmen unwilling to venture closer lest they glimpse the abominations rumored to roam the grounds. Elias and Alara felt the rejection keenly, yet it only drew them closer, their shared suffering forging an even deeper intimacy. They spent hours before cracked mirrors, tracing the emerging grotesqueries with reverent fingers, finding beauty where others saw only horror. Elias would press his elongated hand against Ilara's translucent palm, marveling at how clearly he could see his own bones through her flesh, their laughter ringing out sharp and defiant against the world's judgment. The estate's shadows seemed to deepen in sympathy, swallowing light that might have revealed too much, while the fog pressed thicker against the windows as if to shield them from prying eyes. In stolen moments, they began to speak of their bodies not as curses but as sacred evolutions, marks of distinction that set them apart from the mundane villagers who feared what they could never understand. The deformities grew more pronounced with each passing month, bones elongating further, skin stretching thin and luminous, transforming the twins into living testaments of their bloodline's terrible legacy. Their forms a bridge between the human and something ancient and unknowable that stirred restlessly beneath the surface of their changing flesh. As the twins edged deeper into their teenage years, The forbidden desire that had long simmered beneath their shared skin finally ignited on a night when thunder rolled across the moors like the judgment of forgotten gods. The storm had driven them into the estate's highest tower, a forgotten observatory where cracked glass panes rattled in the wind and rain lashed the stone walls in furious sheets. Lightning illuminated their distorted reflections in the domed ceiling, Elias's elongated limbs casting spidery shadows, Ilara's translucent skin glowing faintly with each electric flash, and in that strobing light, something irrevocable shifted between them. They had sought refuge there to escape the growing ache of isolation, the way villagers now averted their eyes even from a distance, the way servants whispered of demons when they thought the twins could not hear. Huddled together on the cold floor amid scattered astronomical charts yellowed with age, their bodies pressed close for warmth, Elias felt the first tremor of confession rise in his throat. His voice, when it came, was barely above the storm's roar, yet it carried the weight of years unspoken. He told her of the dreams that plagued him no longer as childhood fancies but as visions of completion, of their twisted forms entwined not as siblings but as lovers, of a union that would make them whole where the world had rendered them broken. Ilara did not recoil. Instead, her pale eyes met his with recognition, as if she had waited her entire life for this admission. She confessed in turn, her words tumbling out between lightning strikes, how she had felt the pull growing stronger with each deformation, how the sight of his lengthening bones filled her not with horror but with longing, how their shared abnormalities felt like divine signatures marking them for each other alone. The taboo that should have repelled them instead drew them closer, the societal barriers crumbling beneath the intensity of their bond. In the storm's heart, they made their vow. Hands clasped, his unnaturally long fingers wrapping entirely around her delicate, veined wrist, they swore to marry in secret, to consummate the love that no outsider could comprehend or sanction. The thunder seemed to answer their pledge, shaking the tower as if the heavens themselves protested, while rain poured through cracks in the dome to mingle with their tears of defiant joy. They spoke of a ceremony performed by their own hands, in some hidden corner of the estate where ancestral eyes would bear witness without judgment, sealing their fates in blood and shadow. The decision settled over them like a shroud, heavy with promise and peril, as the storm raged on and the night stretched endlessly before them, pregnant with the terrible beauty of their chosen transgression. Their hearts beat in perfect synchrony, two halves of a malformed whole finally acknowledging the magnetic pull that had always existed, drawing them inexorably toward a union that would defy nature itself and unleash whatever horrors lay dormant in their intertwined blood. In the weeks following their storm-swept vow, Elias and Ilara moved through the estate like conspirators in a ritual older than the stones beneath their feet, searching for the perfect sanctum to bind themselves forever. They discovered it at last in the depths of the house, an abandoned chapel buried behind a false wall in the wine cellar, its existence forgotten by all but the dust that cloaked its pews and altar. Moonlight filtered through a single cracked rose window high above, casting fractured patterns of crimson and indigo across the flagstones, as though the glass itself bled in anticipation. They prepared in secrecy, stealing away under cover of night to clear centuries of cobwebs and grime. Elias, with his elongated arms, reached into shadowed crevices to retrieve tarnished silver candelabra and a cracked chalice etched with symbols that hurt the eyes to follow. Ilara draped the altar in faded velvet rescued from ancestral trunks, her translucent fingers trembling as she arranged withered flowers plucked from the overgrown garden blooms that should have died seasons ago yet clung to life with unnatural tenacity. On the walls hung portraits of long-dead relatives whose deformities echoed their own, eyes seeming to follow the twins' movements with approval rather than reproach. When the chosen night arrived, heavy with the scent of sea salt and impending rain, they descended together, clad in garments pieced from their mother's wedding gown and their father's ceremonial robes, fabrics that whispered against their distorted frames. No priest presided. Instead, they stood before the altar as both officiants and congregation, their voices low and fervent as they recited vows forged from fragments of half-remembered family lore and their own fevered dreams. Elias slipped a ring onto Ilara's finger, an ancient band unearthed from a hidden compartment beneath the altar, its surface engraved with intertwined serpents that seemed to writhe in the candlelight. Ilara, in turn, placed its mate upon his elongated digit, the metal warming instantly as though recognizing its rightful owner. Ancient relics scattered across the altar began to respond as their words intensified, a tarnished locket pulsed with faint inner light, A leather-bound book of genealogies fluttered its pages as if stirred by an unfelt wind, and the very air grew thick, charged with the weight of generations watching from the shadows. They sealed their union with a kiss that tasted of salt and forbidden sweetness, their malformed bodies pressing close in an embrace that blurred the line between devotion and desperation. Candles flickered wildly though no draught disturbed them, shadows lengthening and twisting along the walls like witnesses to a pact that should never have been made. In that hidden chapel, beneath the gaze of ancestors whose own unions had sown the seeds of their ruin, Elias and Alara became husband and wife in the eyes of whatever dark inheritance now claimed them, the echoes of their whispered "I do" lingering long after the flames settled, as though the stones themselves had absorbed the vow and held it close, waiting to exact its terrible price. In the hushed months that followed their clandestine union, a fragile peace settled over the estate, broken only by the distant roar of the sea and the creak of old timbers adjusting to the weight of secrets. Elias and Alara moved through the shadowed rooms with a new tenderness, their touches lingering longer, their whispers laced with the intimacy of lovers rather than siblings. It was Alara who first noticed the change within herself, a subtle quickening, a warmth that bloomed low in her belly and spread outward like ink through water. When she confided in Elias one fog-drenched evening, pressing his elongated hand to the faint curve already forming beneath her translucent skin, his eyes widened with a mixture of exultation and dread. The pregnancy confirmed what they had only dared to dream, their forbidden bond had borne fruit. Yet almost from the moment of conception, their bodies began to respond as though the child within was not merely growing but awakening something long suppressed. Elias felt it first in his joints, a grinding ache as his bones shifted further, his spine curving more pronouncedly, forcing him to navigate doorways sideways like a creature adapting to a narrowing world. His fingers, already unnaturally long, began to branch at the tips, delicate extra joints forming where none should exist, as if his flesh sought to mirror the complexity now dividing within Alara. For her part, Alara's skin grew even thinner, the veins beneath darkening to deep indigo rivers that pulsed visibly with each heartbeat, mapping paths that seemed to shift day by day. Her ribs expanded outward in irregular bursts, pressing against the confines of her dresses until seams split with soft ripping sounds in the night. The changes accelerated with a cruel momentum, as though the union had cracked open a sealed vault within their shared bloodline, releasing dormant mutations that fed greedily on the new life forming between them. They watched each other with growing fascination and fear, tracing the emerging distortions with reverent fingers, finding in their worsening deformities a perverse validation of their choice. Sleep brought no respite. Alara's dreams turned vivid and terrible, visions of a child with limbs fused and multiplied, eyes that gleamed with ancient knowing, moving through the estate's corridors with unnatural grace. Elias shared fragments of these nightmares, waking with her in tangled sheets, their malformed bodies pressed close as if to ward off the implications. The house itself seemed to react, mirrors clouding over when they passed, candles guttering though no wind stirred the air, the ancestral portraits appearing to lean forward as though straining to witness the consequences of the twins' transgression. Days blurred into weeks as the pregnancy progressed at an unnatural pace, Alara's belly swelling with a rapidity that defied nature, while their bodies continued their relentless transformation, flesh and bone reshaping themselves in preparation for the arrival of whatever monstrosity their love had summoned into being. As the pregnancy advanced into its unnatural later stages, Alara's nights fractured into waking visions that left her gasping in the moonlit bedroom, her translucent skin slick with sweat that gleamed like dew on spider silk. She saw the child clearly now, not in gentle maternal dreams, but in stark, merciless detail, a small form racked with convulsions, limbs multiplying and fusing in impossible configurations, tiny fingers sprouting from shoulders, a spine that twisted like a question mark refusing answer. These were no mere nightmares, they clung to her waking hours, overlaying the world like a veil, so that she would catch glimpses of the unborn moving beneath her swollen belly in patterns that mimicked the horrors she beheld in sleep. Elias bore his own accelerating torment. The bones in his legs began to lengthen unevenly, one femur stretching further than its mate until he limped through the corridors with a lurching gait that echoed hollowly against stone. His ribs cracked and reformed nightly, audible pops that woke them both, pushing outward in jagged protrusions that tore through his nightshirts and left blooded stains on the sheets. Skin split along his lengthening arms, healing almost as quickly as it tore, leaving pale scars that mapped his transformation like topographical lines on an ancient chart. He hid the worst from Alara at first, binding his deformities with strips of linen torn from ancestral curtains, but the truth revealed itself in every pained breath, every involuntary grimace when he thought she slept. They tended each other with desperate gentleness, Alara's veined hands tracing the new ridges along his back while Elias pressed his ear to her distended abdomen, listening to movements that were too forceful, too knowing for any ordinary child. The visions grew more frequent, more vivid. Alara would freeze mid-step, eyes glazing as she described the offspring's face, features that shifted between their own and something older, eyes set too wide, a mouth that smiled with too many teeth. These episodes left her weakened, her body pouring its dwindling strength into the life that ravaged her from within, her translucence now so complete that candlelight passed through her like stained glass, illuminating the dark silhouette of what grew inside. The estate seemed to feed on their suffering, its shadows deepening until entire rooms vanished into gloom, the air thick with the copper tang of blood and the sweet rot of overripe fruit from bowls left untouched. Portraits wept slow tears of condensation, their painted eyes tracking the couple's halting progress through halls that narrowed as if the house itself contracted in sympathy with Alara's laboring form. Elias's voice grew hoarse from whispered reassurances that rang hollow even to him, his elongated fingers trembling as they stroked her hair, both of them knowing the birth approached with the inevitability of tide, bringing with it the full revelation of what their love had wrought in flesh and bone and something darker still. The night of the birth arrived without warning, a violent rupture in the oppressive quiet of the estate as Alara's screams tore through the corridors like shards of glass. Elias, his deformed body trembling with helplessness, had prepared the abandoned chapel once more, laying fresh linens upon the ancient altar where they had pledged themselves, the only place that felt sacred enough to receive what was coming. Rain hammered the rose window above, turning the fractured light into rivers of blood red that streamed down the walls, while candles guttered in winds that found no source. Alara's labor was swift and merciless, her translucent form convulsing as the child forced its way into the world with a strength that belied its size. Elias caught it in his elongated hands, slick with blood and amniotic fluid that shimmered unnaturally under the flickering flames. The infant's first cry was not human, a guttural, multi-toned wail that vibrated through the stones and made the ancestral portraits rattle in their frames. As he lifted the child closer, the full extent of its deformities revealed itself in merciless detail. Limbs fused at impossible angles, one arm branching into three smaller appendages that ended in tiny, clawed fingers, legs twisted together into a single column of flesh and bone, terminating in a cluster of toes that flexed independently like seeking roots. Extra appendages protruded from the torso, delicate, boneless tendrils that writhed with purpose, brushing against Elias's skin as if tasting him. The child's spine curved in a serpentine arc, vertebrae visible beneath skin so thin it might have been Alara's own, while its face bore features that mirrored both parents in grotesque exaggeration. Eyes set too wide and luminous, a mouth that split further than nature allowed, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth already formed. Where a normal infant might have soft down, this one bore patches of iridescent scales that caught the candlelight and threw it back in sickly rainbows. Alara reached for it weakly, her veined arms trembling as Elias placed the child against her chest, and for a moment the horror softened into something achingly tender. The creature quieted at her touch, its multiple limbs curling around her with possessive affection. Yet even in that instant of connection, the truth was undeniable. Their union had produced not a child but a confirmation of every whispered curse, every genetic sin compounded through generations now manifesting in this single, terrible form. The infant's eyes, pale and knowing, fixed upon them both with an intelligence far beyond its minutes of life, as though it carried memories not its own, inherited visions of the bloodline's descent into aberration. Blood pooled beneath them on the altar, mixing with melted wax and withered petals, while the storm outside reached its crescendo, thunder shaking the chapel as if the heavens themselves recoiled from what had been brought forth in defiance of natural law. The birth complete, the new family lay entwined amid the ruins of their ceremony, the child's deformities a living testament to the price of their love, each malformed limb a promise of horrors yet to unfold as it drew its first strengthening breaths in the shadowed sanctuary. As the child grew in the shadowed confines of the estate, its deformities did not merely persist but evolved with a deliberate, almost purposeful malice that chilled Elias and Alara to their cores. What had been fused limbs in infancy now elongated and separated in bursts of growth, tendrils unfurling like blooming night flowers to grasp at furniture with surprising dexterity, knocking over candelabra and shattering mirrors that dared reflect its form. The iridescent scales spread across its torso in patterns that mimicked ancient runes etched into the chapel's stones, glowing faintly in darkness as if drawing light from some inner abyss. Supernatural abilities emerged gradually, forcing the twins to confront the full extent of the curse they had perpetuated. The creature, for they could no longer think of it solely as their child, would levitate objects in fits of infantile rage, books flying from shelves to hover menacingly before crashing down, or whisper in voices not its own, echoing the long-dead ancestors whose portraits now wept slow trails of dark fluid down canvas cheeks. It moved through rooms without touching the floor at times, its twisted lower body propelling it forward in silent glides that left trails of viscous fluid on the flagstones, fluid that sizzled faintly against the stone as if corroding the very foundation of their sanctuary. Ilara, her body weakened from the birth, experienced visions induced by the child's touch, glimpses of generational sins, unions similar to their own hidden in faded genealogies, each compounding the genetic decay until this ultimate manifestation clawed its way into existence. Elias's deformities worsened in sympathy, new joints forming in his spine that allowed him to contort in ways mirroring the offspring's unnatural fluidity, pain lancing through him with every movement as though his bones themselves rebelled against the legacy he had helped forge. The estate became a prison of living horror, doors slamming shut unbidden, shadows coalescing into forms that mimicked the family's twisted lineage, reaching out with insubstantial fingers to brush against their skin. Moral decay mirrored the physical, guilt gnawing at them during sleepless nights spent watching the child feed not on sustenance alone, but on the essence of the house itself, wilting ancient plants and causing tapestries to fade and unravel thread by thread. They attempted concealment in deeper chambers, but its cries penetrated walls like blades, drawing unseen forces that rattled chains in forgotten depths and stirred dust into whirlwinds of accusation. The supernatural ties to the family's curse revealed themselves in dreams shared among the three, visions of an unending cycle where deformity bred dark power, and power demanded ever greater transgression. As months blurred into years in accelerated torment, the child's abilities strengthened relentlessly, manipulating shadows to cloak its form in impenetrable gloom, inducing paralysis in any creature that strayed too close, though none from the village dared approach anymore. Elias and Ilara faced the unraveling of their souls, the love once pure now poisoned by the abomination it had spawned, their bodies continuing to waste as flesh loosened from bone and eyes dimmed with the weight of unspoken regret, the curse thriving on their devotion even as it consumed them from within. The suffocating grip of endless night within the estate's crumbling library, Elias and Ilara pried open a concealed vault that yielded only after their blood drawn from fresh wounds on their distorted palms dripped onto its ancient mechanism. Inside lay the forbidden family archive, volumes bound in leather that felt unnaturally warm, pages filled with confessions scrawled in fading ink across generations. As they pored over the records by guttering candlelight, the lantern's flame dancing wildly as if agitated by the revelations, the climactic truth unfurled like a noose tightening around their throats. The genealogy was a meticulously charted descent into aberration. Early entries noted distant cousin marriages to safeguard inheritance, but soon the unions grew closer, siblings pairing in shadowed ceremonies, their offspring catalogued with clinical detachment alongside sketches of emerging deformities, limbs that branched, skin that thinned to reveal inner workings, spines that coiled like serpents. Each generation documented the same progression, subtle anomalies at birth escalating through adolescence, forbidden love blooming amid isolation, secret weddings in the chapel below, births that compounded the mutations into ever more extreme forms. Marginalia celebrated these changes as evolution toward enlightenment, powers awakening, levitation, shadow manipulation, shared visions all tied to the blood's relentless purification through incest. Elias's voice faltered as he read the most recent entries, recognizing their parents' names, twins like themselves, born deformed, wed in secrecy, their union producing Elias and Ilara as the next vessels. Illustrations matched perfectly, their own elongated fingers, translucent veins, the child's fused and multiplied limbs depicted in prophetic detail decades before its birth. The cycle was eternal, unbroken, each pair convinced of their uniqueness only to perpetuate the horror, the supernatural abilities not gifts but chains binding them to repetition. Realization shattered them. Ilara collapsed first, her body convulsing as veins burst beneath her skin in dark blooms, while Elias clawed at the pages, his branching fingers tearing through paper as madness surged. Hallucinations overtook reality. Ancestors materialized from the shadows, their grotesque forms pressing close, murmuring urgings to embrace the legacy, to breed again despite the ruin. The child appeared in the doorway, its iridescent scales pulsing with satisfaction, tendrils extending to draw them into its embrace as if claiming inheritance. Guilt and horror intertwined into delirium, Elias laughing hysterically as bones cracked and reformed in agonizing loops, Ilara weeping blood that traced paths down her luminous flesh. The estate trembled in sympathy, walls cracking to reveal glimpses of buried skeletons locked in eternal entwines, the air alive with whispers of past twins lost to the same epiphany. Their minds fractured irreparably, trapped in loops of memory and regret, bodies accelerating toward dissolution as flesh loosened and fell away, leaving them as spectral guardians of the curse, doomed to witness the cycle's inexorable continuation in whatever fragments of sanity remained amid the encroaching void.